What's up, mutants? Will here from 8-Bit Massacre, bringing you my second review and my favorite horror series of all time, Phantasm. Today we'll be doing, of course, Phantasm 2. But before we get started, we gotta get those drive-in totals. So Joe Bob, roll that beautiful beam footage.
So let's take a look at those drive-in totals and get started. We've got 12 dead bodies, exploding house, one 4-barreled sawed-off shotgun, dwarf tossing, 10 breasts. Of course, those are scissored out of the TNT version. Embalming needles plunge through various parts of various bodies. One motor vehicle chase with crash and burn, ear lopping, forehead drilling, wrist hacking, bimbo flinging, grandma bashing, devil sex, crematorium foo, flamethrower foo. And this movie contains the most terrifying scene I've ever witnessed. A perfectly decent 1971 Hemi Cuda flipping over, landing on its roof, and bursting into flame. I cried for 2 hours. It's amazing what they let these people do for the sake of a goddamn movie. A Hemi Cuda, greatest muscle car ever made. So many horses in that baby you couldn't get insurance for it. They use it for a stupid movie stunt. It's like cutting up the Mona Lisa, you know? It's like destroying the original poker-playing dog. Anyway, 4 stars on this movie. Outstanding. Check it out and we'll be here.
Thank you, Joe Bob. Thank you. So, in this one, we start off where we left off, where, you know, the end of the first movie, you could see it as like Michael's dream of how he was dealing with losing his family and seeing the tall man as like the mortician trying to take away his family and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, in the last second, the tall man comes for his revenge, and so then it's like, well, what the hell in the movie was real and what isn't? You'll continue to have that throughout the series, and in every movie, I like to try to figure out kind of whose perspective, maybe whose dreams and reality we're following, but I don't think that's the most fun of the series. The surrealism definitely adds to the creativity and the fun, but the real heart is the characters. I think the biggest Phantasm fans are in it because of the characters. And when I see criticisms of the movies on other channels, like if they're just more casual fans of the first time they're seeing it, a lot of time they're just kind of judging the movies kind of based on its own merit in the filmmaking and the quality. But the Phantasm fans, I don't think, see it that way. It's more like they just love the characters, and they know Don Coscarelli, the director, is just trying to do the best with what he's got, because most of the time, except for part 2, he's working with limited resources. And so most of the sequels are made for the fans, and the fans know that, and they've even contributed to help get them made. And so the true like heart of the films are these characters and following them through these adventures, no matter kind of the quality of each film or what's going on, and kind of the different tones, which most of the fans like that each film, it feels like a Phantasm film while having its own like distinct flavor. But this one is the most studio made one. It's got the highest, most slick production, like highest budget slick production. And there's a controversy, speaking of the characters, with the recasting of Mike. There's the only one where Mike is played by a different person, and most people don't like it, or at least like that aspect of it. But I don't mind it. I like James LeGros, and I think he's great in the part. In terms of the surrealism of the film, you could just say Mike was feeling very James LeGros during this episode of their journey. He's definitely a more, since this one's more action-heavy 80s, like action movie style, they have like a hunkier person like playing Mike. But I'm fine with it. I have this kind of philosophy about the movies and books and shows and whatnot, that I like that all this stuff, like the flaws, I wouldn't call this a flaw, but I'm just saying like the flaws and the behind the scenes stuff and everything that caused it to turn out the way it is, like these things wouldn't be what we love if we like changed them and kind of like fit them to maybe the way we would want them or think they would be like perfectly done or perfectly made. I like everything. I like flaws and all, you know, weird continuity issues, whatnot. I mean, I love the Evil Dead series because of the bad continuity issues between the films. Like, there's something just fun, and you can tell it's just like low budget creativity and people just like doing whatever they want, basically. But we do have a recast of Mike. I think James LeGros is great, and then we got Reggie Bannister back as Reggie and James LeGros as Mike, and then we have two new main side characters, Liz, who's narrating the beginning of the film, and then they hook up with her later on because they're after her to try to rescue her, and then we have and she's played by Paula Irvine, and then we have Samantha Phillips playing Alchemy, which is kind of Reggie's love interest in this one. And so the film starts out with Liz narrating about what happened at the end of the last film and what's going on in this one. And basically, she's kind of a psychic, and Mike is kind of a psychic like now. And there are these kids, these now teenagers that the tall man is after for some reason because of their abilities. And there's a 7-year jump. It starts out, it shows the end of the movie, and then it shows Reggie hearing the commotion when the tall man comes after Mike. Like, he springs into action, like grabs the shotgun, starts fighting the Jawa dwarfs, and eventually blows up his own house to kill the monsters and save Mike. But the tall man still escapes, but so do they. And then there's a 7-year jump where Mike's in like a mental health clinic, and he's finally being released. He's just telling them what they want to hear finally so he can get the heck out of there, and immediately goes back to like going after the tall man, and he immediately starts digging up graves in the town to see if the tall man's doing his dirty work in that area. And Reggie shows up, finds him digging up graves, and is like trying to stop him, like, what are you doing? You just got out of the the clinic, like, and starts trying to convince him. You don't really know if Reggie is lying to try to help Mike move on, acting like he doesn't remember blowing up his own house and all that, or if he really doesn't remember, or if that even happened. Because in this, it's like the tall man's like Freddy Krueger, except for he can be outside the dream and also like distort and affect reality. So in this, whether you're in the real world or in a dream, it doesn't really matter. You can traverse the vibrational gates, like in the physical world, and like in your mind, you can kind of traverse the realms and go through the gates and all this kind of stuff. So it really doesn't matter. And so the tall man, when he's around, he'll just affect reality, and you know, you could be dreaming, you could not, but still you'll be like in this alternate kind of realm of his creation. So as you go, you don't know what characters actually know what, remember what, because you think Reggie wouldn't remember the stuff that seemed almost all a dream in the first film, when he gets like killed in the end of that whole dream sequence after shutting down the vibrational gates. But then in part 3, he remembers shutting down the vibrational gates in part 1, so it's like, who knows? Who knows? So anyway, Reggie has his family, like a family gathering, waiting at home to celebrate Mike's return from the clinic. And the tall man gets revenge by blowing up his house and all his family, including his wife and daughter. And so, and that what's cool is they used the same house. They shot it from to save money. They blew up a house and shot it from 2 different perspectives. So at the beginning, when Reggie blows up the house to save Mike, it's the same house that is Reggie's that gets blown up later in the movie, and they make it look different by using different perspective, which is really clever. It's that just clever, lower budget filmmaking style of Don Coscarelli, where he just does a lot, like with what he has to work with. And so they have a funeral for his family where they basically look like the Blues Brothers, and then Reggie's in it. He's like, okay, like, screw all this, like, now they've taken away my whole family too. He's in the same boat as Mike, and they get in the Himikuda and they get to work. And this is where it really becomes like the show Supernatural, where you can tell Supernatural completely ripped off from this movie because they take the black muscle car Himikuda to a hardware store and to load up, to weapon up. And when I was young, I first saw this scene was the first scene that I saw in the series. I was flipping through, it was like on cable TV, and it could have been, it might have been Monster Vision, like Joe Bob Briggs that I just played. That episode was where I saw it, and I just was flipping through and I saw these dudes in a hardware store loading up a buggy full of weapons to go fight some monsters, and I was like, this is the coolest thing, and I started watching it, and I loved it. And so then I went and found the first movie, and I think the third movie had just came out. So I rented all three of them and recorded them on one VHS to watch. It was like one film, basically, at the time, because it works that way. Each one begins where the last one left off, and they're all made by the same people. And so it's, you can watch them all like one film. That's one of the great things about it, even though each one's like years apart, like made, like you're seeing them in different eras of their life as it goes. Like Coscarelli is really creative at making it very adhesive, connecting to the beginning and end of each one. So yeah, so they go to the hardware store, and Mike's like, let's go shopping. And they fill it up with like sledgehammers and all sorts of stuff. They grab some chainsaws, and then what really blew my mind, especially as a kid, is then Reggie gets like two double barrel shotguns and just welds them together and makes a badass like 4-barrel shotgun, and Mike makes a flamethrower, a badass homemade flamethrower, and they got this whole getup. Like Reggie's got a bandolier full of like shotgun bullets for the shotgun, and Mike has like a badass pistol and a flamethrower, and Reggie's got like chainsaws and drills like hanging off of his belt to like fight with. It's like they're like blue collar badasses basically. Like they look freaking cool. Sorry. So let's see here. So the tall man is taking out small towns at first. He's building his like undead army or whatever he's up to. And so he's going around, he's stealing bodies from graves, compacting them, turning them into Jawas, and then creating his silver spheres. And he's starting at small towns all over America where no one's really gonna notice like that this is happening. But Reggie and Mike are on to what he's up to, and so they're following these like decimated, empty ghost towns, and that's the path they're following to get to him. And so they make it to this one place, and this is when you start seeing like the special effects work in this one. Greg Nicotero and Robert Kurtzman that eventually made KMB Effects, they work on this one. This was like right after Nicotero also working on Evil Dead 2. And you get to see a great sequence where they see this whole graveyard that's dug up, and they go into the mausoleum, and they go down into the basement, and they find Liz. It looks like Liz, and she's like covered in a sheet, and he's like, oh my god, there's Liz, the girl I was telling you about, because Mike and Liz are psychically talking to each other, and Mike is telling Reggie about her and that they gotta find her. And Reggie doesn't believe him, basically, or is just skeptical. Thinks it's just a wet dream, but Mike's like adamant that they gotta find her. And they finally, what it seems like, find her. But it's really like a fake out. Like this Freddy Krueger stuff happens where like the tall man comes out of her back in this Freddy Krueger looking form, and like tells them, kind of just says like where he is. Like he's like, come east if you want to find me. And then Reggie has the most like realistic reaction where he just freaks out and torches that thing. But they realize that was just a fake out illusion or whatnot. And continue on the trail, but that's also where a lot of the supernatural. So we got the two hunting bros with their black muscle car with the trunk full of weapons, and then also the main bad guy is collecting, like trying to collect psychic children, like the yellow-eyed demon or whatever from Supernatural. It's like this is the one that's the most like supernatural. um so that just always makes me laugh. Like season 1 and 2 of Supernatural were practically ripped off of this one specific movie, or at least the framework of their plot. But anyway, let's see. So also while they're in this mausoleum, Mike sees a dead body on a table, and then when he turns back around, it's gone. And that's who's eventually going to be the character of Alchemy. He starts kind of dreaming of seeing her multiple times, and that's about as surreal of elements as this one get. I think the studio wanted him to tone down the surrealism. So there's not as much like surreal sequences, but the whole thing is still meant to be like inside of possibly a dream or alter, or constantly having the reality altered whenever you see the tall man and his goons and the spheres. And so even if it seems like it's existing more in reality and doesn't have more kind of crazier dreamlike elements, it's still practically the whole movie is anyway, if that makes sense, because all the Phantasm movies are kind of in this manipulated dream reality. But we still get a little bit of those elements, and so we see the first part of that not only with the Phantom Liz Freddy Krueger monster, but also of the first sighting of Mike seeing Alchemy dead on a gurney and then her body disappearing. But then we jump to seeing Liz with her grandmother, and her grandfather just died, and she's going with her grandmother to the mortuary slash church where they're gonna have a service, and we get introduced to two of the main kind of side goons in the movie, these two like twin looking mortician guys, and then the priest that works at this place, who is definitely like realizing something weird's going on at his mortuary and church, and he's kind of freaking out and not having it. The two twins definitely work for the tall man. And then when Liz, she starts exploring the mausoleum and has her first encounter face to face with the tall man, and it's a callback shot to the first movie when Jody first comes face to face with the tall man, when he's kind of wandering around a mausoleum, where the tall man grabs his shoulder and is like, "The funeral service is about to begin." And then she freaks out and runs away, because that's always like intimidating, because the tall man's so tall and he's just so like stern and adamant. It's great stuff. But then let's see. So yeah, so then Reggie and Mike are back on the road, and Mike's like sleeping in the car, and he's dreaming of seeing Alchemy again on the side of the road, and in the dream they just kind of pass right by, but when he wakes up, like she's in the car with him, with both of them. Reggie had picked her up, and so Mike gets Reggie to pull over, and I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea. I keep having dreams about this girl and she's dead and all this stuff. And he's like, well, like Reggie, they've been on the road, it's implied, for maybe like months and stuff, like maybe even a year. Like, you don't really know the time frame. They just been on the road in the car going from town to town. And even though Reggie lost his family, it's, been a little while, and he's gotten kind of horny on the road. He's got this line where Mike's trying to convince him, like, maybe we shouldn't have this girl tag along with us. And Reggie's like, it gets kind of hard on the road. He's like, she's better, safer with us than without us, right? And Mike's like, I guess, in a horny sort of way. So they let her tag along so they can at least protect her. And they get to the town where Liz is, and they drop Alchemy off at the house, and they load up with their weapons, and they go to the local mausoleum where Liz has also been lured to. During this, Liz's grandmother has been taken by the tall man, and the tall man kind of leaves a note, a calling card saying, like, if you want her back, you know, come to the mausoleum. And so you got her going to the mausoleum, and you have Mike and Reggie going there to investigate. And we get a great sequence. First, we get the priest. He's trying to help Liz, and he comes face to face with the tall man for the first time, or probably not the first time, but he comes face to face with the tall man. The tall man has this great line about, you think when you die you go to heaven, you come to us. And he's got him kind of dangling by his crucifix up in the air and drops him, and the dude runs off, and then the tall man sends his sentinel spheres after the priest, and then we get to see the spheres have some new tricks up their sleeve. So in this sequence, the sphere that comes after the priest, it has a spinning blade that comes out and goes and chops up his ear, like Reservoir Dog style, and circles back around and then drills into his head as Liz watches on, because he's trying to help Liz. And then Liz encounters the tall man, and there's this scene where the tall man like picks Liz up and like throws her against the wall, and it's so like noticeable that it's like on wires and stuff, that it's like hilarious. Like it was like she flies across the room on wires, and the way she like bounces off the wall and lands, it's like me and my friend Chris would rewind that scene over and over and watch it because it was so funny. Like, I'm putting it in this video, y'all are gonna die. If you haven't seen it, it's funny as hell. But the Liz escapes, and Reggie and Mike haven't even made it inside yet. But let's see. But I don't know if we've seen the Gravers yet. I think so. I think while Liz is in here, we see a new enemy I want to bring up real quick. These Gravers, they're just normal looking kind of people-sized people, not like the dwarfs, but they wear like gas masks, and they're like the minions that the tall man sends to go out and dig up the bodies, dig up all the graves and get the bodies and bring them to the tall man to be compacted. And so Mike and Reggie are kind of down in one of the dugout graves in front of the mausoleum, and Liz comes escaping, runs out and falls into the hole and runs into him. And then her and Mike, even though they just met, since they've been psychically communicating or in love or something, I guess, they just start immediately making out. And Reggie's like, what the hell is going on? He's like, oh, hey Reg, this is Liz. So he's got this look like, check it out. But they take Liz back to the house, and then we got our four main characters of this film finally together for a nice little like nighttime fireside hangout in their little living room. So you got Reggie, Mike, Liz, and Alchemy all together, and then Liz has like a great line for any of y'all who like to cook around the restaurant industry, where she calls the flying spheres that drill into your head like flying Cuisinarts. Like, I'll always love that line. That's really funny to me. But then we get some intimate moments between the characters. So you got Mike and Liz go to their room, and Reggie and Alchemy, because Alchemy's all about some Reggie. He like loves his bald head. And she's just a freaky deaky, like awesome chick. And so so she just goes like buck wild on Reggie, just like riding him like a super enthusiastic cowgirl. They're like teenagers in there, and then the real teenagers are in the other room, and they're laying there and they're talking psychically and talking about being in love. And there just happened like a more mature, intimate moment where the actual adults are like having like teenage sex in the other room. But There's like they set booby traps over the house, and one of them goes off, so it interrupts the festivities. And Mike and Reggie go downstairs to check out what happened, and it was just like a cat that got in, it got splattered all over the wall or whatever. But then Mike, for the first time in the series, starts to come kind of to reality. Like he's like, realizing now they have kind of a new family they're building. They got people they care about again, and maybe they shouldn't be going on this suicide mission. And he's like, I'm a teenager and you're a bald middle-aged ex-ice cream vendor. Like, what are we supposed to do against the forces of darkness? That's such like a great sequence. So you see for the first time, like Mike starting to come out of the fantasy or whatever he kind of created for himself to deal with all this. Because while we're talking about that, it seems like the first movie, if we want to go into like Mike, kind of that one being in his head, like dealing with his family getting taken away. This one, part two, makes me think about if you like are at work or something, you're daydreaming, like something like that happened, and then the next part of your daydream, if anyone's ever had this, like it becomes like an 80s action movie where you go to get revenge on like whoever took away like your people or whatever bad thing happened. And so you basically become like the Punisher and you're like daydream. And this seems like that section of a daydream where if the first one it's more about your fears about what would happen if I lost this person. That is like the second part of your daydream, which is part Phantasm 2, where you load up on weapons and you go after whoever took your people away. And but anyway, Mike comes to that realization, but Reggie, um, you know, sitting there and they're having a great moment, and then Liz, she's been in the house just for a little while, but the tall man shows up and takes Liz again, and it's a scene that's like a callback to the first film where the tall man takes Mike, bursts through the window and takes Mike. And so they load up the car and they're like, let me, or Kimmy, stay here and be safe. But they load up and they go after the tall man, and there's like a car chase. And this is the part that Joe Bob talks about that just drives him crazy about this movie. They have a car chase, and Reggie, he kind of gets entranced by the tall man, and Mike's like, "What are you doing? Shoot the fucker!" So Reggie raises the 4 barrel, but then the tall man like shoves them into like a boulder on the side of the road, and their car ramps off. The Hemi ramps off of it and lands upside down, and Reggie's stuck inside. And so Mike saves him and pulls him out, but then the Hemi blows up. And Joe probably hates that scene. Because I mean, why wouldn't you? It's like they blew up a Hemi Cuda. It's pretty depressing. But then we got but that pisses Reggie off especially. So he's got his line like, "Come on, let's go kick some ass," and they grab their gear and they head to the mausoleum for the final fight. And so as they're making their way, they get there and they're looking like super badasses. They're back in their full get up with the bandolier, the chainsaws, the 4-barrel shotgun, the flamethrower, all that stuff, looking like the two most badass blue collar motherfuckers like on the planet. Liz is captured, and one of those twin mortician guys has Liz, and he's about to put her in a crematorium. And so on a side note, Sam Raimi is like friends with Don Cascarelli and was gonna have a cameo in this film, but something about scheduling, he wasn't able to do it. But they still gave him a cameo anyway in this sequence in the crematorium, which you'll see in the video. So we get our little Sam Raimi cameo, and then Liz, as a badass, like escapes and ends up beating this dude's ass and knocking him into the crematorium and burning him. So that's one of the two twins down in that scene. Um, and then Reggie and Mike are working their way in, and they find the tall man uses this yellow embalming fluid to like reanimate the corpses to create his minions, and so they find one of the tanks, and Reggie gets a giant thing of hydrochloric acid and starts filling it into the reanimation fluid. So if the tall man tries to use it again, it's not going to work out so well. And he's like, let's see him try to reanimate someone with this shit. um, but so yeah, they do that, and then Liz reconnects with like Mike and the spheres, because the spheres are out in full force. There's three, and there's two like silver ones and one gold one, and the silver spheres are like coming after like Liz and Mike, and the second twin mortician guy, he like pops out of nowhere and grabs Liz, but then one of the spheres like is like coming after him and like drills into his hand and gets it stuck in the wall, and he's sitting there like struggling like to get it off his hand, and then you see the gold spear come around the corner and start coming at this dude, and he freaks out, and he's like he like looks, and he's holding this axe that he attacked Mike and Liz with, and he's like happy to have it because he's like, oh, I can use this to escape, and he like cuts his own like hand off, he like hacks at the wrist and then cuts his hand off so he can get away from the gold sphere. And he runs one way, and Liz and Mike run the other, and then the sphere goes around the corner going after Mike and Liz, and we get a cool like Raimi styled like film sequence where it's chasing them through these doorways, and it's like a first person perspective of the sphere as like they're shutting the doors like right in front of the sphere, and it's just bursting through each one until they close like a big like steel one in front of it and get it stuck for a second. But the while this is happening though, Reggie, because it's like, where's Reggie? Reggie is separately, he went down in this basement and he's fighting one of the gravers, and they're kind of duking it out, and then Reggie he pulls out, he's got his chainsaw hanging off his belt, he pulls out the chainsaw, revs it up, and he's like, come on you mother. And then Graver grabs his chainsaw and pulls it out, and as he's pulling it out, it's like 3 times as big as Reggie's. And Reggie, the look on Reggie's face is just priceless. And that's a gag like I've seen recently in the movie Mandy, where there's a chainsaw fight, and Nicolas Cage has like a more normal sized chainsaw, and this other guy grabs a chainsaw and pulls it, and it's like way longer, and Nick Cage has this look on his face like, oh shit, and it's like I'm pretty sure it's influenced by this scene, like it seems almost identical. And so but he gets in a chainsaw fight with a graver, and then back with Liz and Mike, they get intercepted in this one room by the other twin attacks them again, and as he's attacking Liz and Mike, the gold ball finally gets through that thicker door and bursts through and like hits the dude in the back, and he flies across the room, and it's like on his back, and all of a sudden, instead of the normal like little drill that comes out the front like with the 2 prongs, this one has got like a circle saw blade that comes out, but it's like a curved circle saw blade that's like this, and it starts spinning and starts digging into the back, and then it starts going through this dude's body, and he's being like tossed all around this corner, and he's being like drug up the wall and shit like that, and it's going up and up, and you see it like go up his throat, and then he like falls to the ground, and then Mike and them were like, oh shit, is he dead? Like, is the sphere gonna come out of him and come after us? And then it's like they grab and flip him over, and you see the sphere as it was coming out of his face like got stuck, in a great practical effect. So Reggie, he finally defeats the chainsaw guy by, you know, giving the dude he basically takes the chainsaw and shoves it into the guy's nuts, and like kills him that way. And as he's like leaving the basement, he's got his four barrel, and a bunch of the Jawa dwarfs come and are behind him. There's four of them come up the stairs behind him, and he finally uses the four barrel, but he doesn't use it the whole movie. You're like excited he made this four barrel shotgun. You see it in so many scenes, and he never uses it until this scene. He blows these four Jawas away, and then he like just throws the gun away, and you're like, what? All this he used to just like once and then throws it away, but luckily that gets rectified, and starting in part 3 he magically has it again, and then in the rest of the sequels he uses it a lot more. In 3 and 4 he definitely like uses it a bunch. Of 3 he definitely uses a lot, so it's good. In 3 we get to see a lot of four barrel action. But in this one, he just tosses it aside and meets back up with Liz and Mike, and they go find where the dude got his hand stuck to the wall with the silver sphere. They kind of pull it off the wall, and they find like there's like a locked door, and the key to opening it is using one of the spheres. And that's what leads to the 2001 A Space Odyssey room, I always call it. um the vibrational gate room that has the dimensional tuning forks that lead to his dimension, the tall man's dimension or whatnot. And when they go in there, they're like, okay. They see the dwarves in a bunch of those containers that are to be shipped to the other dimension, and Reggie gets the flamethrower and is about to like burn the whole place down when the tall man shows up and like knocks Reggie down and Mike, and grabs Liz. And Reggie and Mike fall into the dimensional gate, and so they're being kind of sucked into that, and they're trying to crawl their way out, and Mike gets out, and then Reggie's in there, and like one of the doors crawls out of one of the barrels, and it's like coming up towards Reggie, and he's freaking out, and his face as usual is priceless, his reactions. And Mike pulls Reggie out at the last second, and Liz, she's about to actually get embalmed. The tall man's about to embalm Liz, and it's the stuff they put the hydrochloric acid in, but Mike's able to interrupt it, and tall man and Mike kind of get into an altercation, and Liz comes up behind the tall man and shoves the embalming rod into the back of the neck of the tall man. And like Reggie like sees her do that, and he runs over and flips the switch of the embalming fluid on. And you see one of the best sequences in all the movies in terms of special effects, where the yellow embalming fluid / hydrochloric acid just starts like melting the tall man from the inside out. Like his skin just starts melting off, and his eyes explode, and all this great stuff. And so as they start then finishing what Reggie was trying to start, and they torch the whole place and run out of the building, and Alchemy shows up. And it was like they're in the nick of the time to rescue them, and they're like, hell yeah. So the four of them ride out like bosses, like we just kicked all the ass and defeated the evil. But that's never how it goes in Phantasm. That's a very short-lived victory. So basically, they're riding, they're happy, they're celebrating, and finally they search kind of around the vehicle, and they're like, all right, the coast is clear, because they're in a hearse, and there's a coffin in the back. They check it, nothing's in there. And then Alchemy like shuts the little thing between, like Liz and Mike are in the back, and in the front seat is Reggie and Alchemy, and then Alchemy shuts the thing between them so they can have some privacy, and then Alchemy's like playing with her hair and then pulls it off, and you see like part of, or like the side of her head like all gross, and it turns out like she's a bad guy. And the hearse starts like swerving, and you hear Reggie screaming, and it stops, and then Reggie runs up to the side window and is like banging. He looks all fucked up, and Mike's like, Reggie, and then he's like Mike's trying to comfort Liz, like, it's cool, like this is just a dream, it's all a dream, and then the tall man shows back up and is like, no, it's not. And it ends exactly like the first film, where a tall man shows up, and then yanks them out of the window and it goes to credits, just like the first film. Um, and so there we go. That's Phantasm 2. It's like a really fun ride. It's more of like an 80s action movie compared to the first one. And it's just a blast. I love this one. I love all of them. But this one's great. It's a great follow-up to the first one. Most like people that I see like usually debate um whether they like the first or the second one the best. I see more casual fans like in the second one. The more hardcore fans like 1 and 4, which are the more surrealistic. They're the most phantasmy ones. But casual fans tend to like part 2. That's the one that usually gets them into the series the most. But it is a great series. I love these movies, as you know. If you haven't seen this one, you should check it out. You should check all of them out. Um, and that's my review for Phantasm 2 slash, rundown of the synopsis and story. Just for fun. I'm gonna show y'all a bunch of scenes. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let's see if there was anything else I forgot. No, I think that's it. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I really enjoy making these. I love just talking about the things I love, the movies I love, and sharing them with you guys. And I hope to see y'all again real soon. I'll have the Phantasm 3 review coming sometime soon for you guys. So look out for that. And I'll see y'all in the next one. Have a good one.